Hello and welcome back to the PSD to HTML flat design build. In our last video we finished the hover effects for our menu items, and there's one more thing left to do for our main menu. And if we look in our Photoshop file, we can see very quickly what that is. In our Photoshop file we have these little dividers, and we have dividers in our HTML, but in our Photoshop file we have these little circles as part of the dividers. And in this video, we're going to create those circles using HTML and CSS. We're just going to do it in CSS. We're not going to use any extra markup in our HTML. Instead, we're going to add this content using CSS by itself. So let's talk about how to do that. I'm going to jump back into TextMate or whatever text editor you're using, and I've moved everything into the Site 14 folder, so all the changes we make in this lesson will be saved there. And if we scroll down to our navigation section, here's our main navigation section. We have some rules for the unordered list within our main nav, for the list items within that unordered list, and for the anchor tags within those list items. And we even created a border right property for the last child or the last list item in that list. And now we're going to use the before pseudo class to create these circles that we're talking about. Now, if you've never used the before pseudo class, let me show you very quickly what it does. So I'm going to point to the main nav class. Inside that main nav, we're going to point to the list items, and we're going to point to the anchor tags within those list items. And what I want to do is I want to add some content before those anchor tags. And the way we do that is right next to the anchor tag. I'm not hitting a space here. We simply have a colon and then before. By doing this, we can add some content just before each of our anchor tags within that main nav list. So the way we would do that is we would use the content property, and inside that content property, we can put some text here. So we can say this content was created in CSS. So we'll just save that for now, jump into our browser and refresh our page. And now we can see that before each of our links, we have some extra text added in there. Now that's a lot of content, so let's get rid of all of that. And let's just put CSS inside quotes, so it's a little easier to see what it's doing. So we'll save that, refresh our page, and you'll see that the content is still there. We still have the word home, about, services, etc., but it's putting the word CSS before each of those items. And we can style that little block of content that we've created there. So what we could do for this content, we could give it a different background color. So we could set background color here to, let's just set it to black. So we can save that and refresh our page. And now we can see that that little bit of content has a background color. Well, we're going to use this trick to create circles that are going to show up on the left edge of our buttons. So let's jump back into our CSS and talk about how to do that. Well, for now, I'm going to leave the background color to black, but I'm going to get rid of the content here, and I'm just going to put a space. So we have a single quote, a space, and then a closing single quote. So let's save that and refresh our page, and we see that everything disappears because a space really isn't rendered in HTML. And so that kind of disappears, but if we give it a width and height and set it up the right way, then we should be able to see that background color again. However, remember, a space is simply an inline object. Just like any words or characters, anything like that, it's an inline object. So you can't expressly give it a width and a height. If you want to give it a width and height, then you need to either make it an inline block element, make it a block element, or set its position to absolute. And we're going to do the last. We're going to set its position to absolute because we need to position this item on the left edge of our list items. Now remember, if we want to use absolute positioning to position something within another object, then we need to make sure that the object that it's inside of, or its parent object, has its position set to relative. And if we scroll up, we can see these list items already have their position set to relative. So that part's already taken care of. So let's scroll back down and point to this list item before pseudo element here, and let's give this a position of absolute, and then we're going to set the width and the height both to 10 pixels. So let's save that, jump back into our browser and refresh. And now we can see what we've created. We've created a little square using CSS. Now, if we want to position that on the left edge, we can simply set the left property here equal to 0 pixels. So we could save that and refresh, and now we can see it's on the left edge. Notice we can also put a border around it. So let's do that. I'm going to come up here just after content, maybe after the background color here, and let's create a border for this. I'm going to make it a 3-pixel border. I'm going to make it solid, and I'm going to give it a value, a hex value of df, which is the same shade of gray as the background of our website, which, if you remember, is also the same shade of gray as our dividers on our menu. So now that same shade of gray is surrounding that particular item. Now we can round this item off and make it into a circle by creating a border radius for this item. So let's jump back into our code, and just under border, let's create a property for border hyphen radius. Here we're going to set the border radius to 10 pixels. And you can set it to any number as long as it's a large number. If you do something small like 1 or 2 pixels, then we'll just see the corners rounded a little bit. We want the entire thing to be completely rounded. So you can choose 10, you can choose 50, you can choose whatever higher number you want to use, and it will round those corners off all the way until we have a perfect circle. So let's save our CSS file, refresh our page, and now we have circles. So you can probably see where we're going with this. Now I want to take that circle and give it, if we go back to our Photoshop file, that same orange color that we're using for our home background. So let's jump back into TextMate, and we can scroll up here to our BG orange class and just highlight this background color property here. So let's copy that, come back down to our before pseudo element here, and let's just replace this background color here, by pasting the code that we just copied. Save that, go back to our browser and refresh, and now our dots are the right color. So now we just need to move them over to the left a little bit more and maybe move them down a little bit as well. So let's go back to our code and let's do that. Right now we have our left property set to 0. If we want to move it even further to the left, then we need to give it a negative number. So I'm going to give this a value of negative 10 pixels. So it will nudge it to the left 10 pixels. And then I'm going to give it a top position of 27 pixels. Now sometimes I calculate these numbers using math by taking the heights of all of the elements and figuring out what the exact center is. Some I do it by trial and error just to see what it looks like. Sometimes putting it perfectly in the center doesn't work just right. And this time I did it by trial and error until I got values that looked good here. But that's how I came up with the negative 10 and the 27 pixels for the top position. So let's save that and refresh our page. And there we go. Now we have our dividers where they need to be. And we didn't have to create any extra HTML markup to do that. If you wanted to, you could create more list items in between and give those list items a class of divider, and then inside those list items put an image of an orange circle or something like that. But that's a lot of extra markup just to create some fancy dividers for your site. This way we can create our dividers in CSS, and if we ever want to get rid of those dividers or change the way this menu works, then we can do it all in CSS without having to worry about the markup. Now the way this is set up, you might see one small problem. And if you don't see it, then you might notice it if we jump back into our Photoshop file. In our Photoshop file, you'll see we have these circle dividers to the left of every single button, but we also have one to the right of the contact button. And right now, there's nothing to the right of the contact button because we've aligned all of these dividers to the left edge of that content area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create another CSS rule. What we did here is we created one using the before pseudo class, and now we're going to create another rule that's going to be almost identical to this one, but we're going to use the after pseudo class. So I'm going to start just by highlighting and copying this entire rule for the before pseudo class. We'll copy that and then skip a couple lines and paste it. Then we're going to change this to after. But we don't want to create this for every single list item. We only need it for the very last list item. So what we're going to do is we're going to point to, I'm going to get rid of this anchor tag here. We're not going to do it after the anchor tag itself. We're going to do it after the list item. So we're going to point to li colon last hyphen child colon after. Now if we want, we could do space a colon after, and that would work just fine. So let's go ahead and do that. Since we're doing it with the anchor tag up here, let's also do it with the anchor tag here. So we have our content of space, background color is going to stay the same, border is going to stay the same, border radius, position, width and height are going to stay the same. The only thing that's really going to change is this value right here. Instead of setting left to -10, we're going to set the right value to -10, and that will pull it over to the right side of that last list item. So let's see if that worked. We'll save our file, go back to our browser and refresh our page, and there we go. Now we have another dot there to the right of our very last list item, or our last menu item in our main navigation. And now that we've got that done, we can move on to our next section. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.